And this hangout is on air. Welcome. This is Things That Matter. I'm Joe Carter, and James Dondo and I host this show where we take on topics aimed at understanding ourselves, each other, and our world so we can navigate more effectively with our own lives and contribute to the community we all depend on. So that's it. James, you want to say hi?
Yeah, just hello to everybody from the cold north. It really is not fun up here, but we survive. I'm looking forward to having this discussion with Helena. I've known her for a few years now, and she's got a lot of good insight on this stuff, and she's helped me understand a lot of things about how my brain works, which is rather important.
Wow.
And I'm just looking forward to the discussion while she eats her peanut butter.
I've got peanut butter.
So
I'm Helena, and yeah, I don't know what I'm doing on YouTube. I've been here for, I think, maybe it's been more than 2 years. I don't know.
Almost 2 years now.
Almost 2 years. Wow.
Almost
3?
3 years now.
No! Okay, well, all right, there you go. But yeah, so I guess I'm just here floating around and seeing what's happening.
Peanut butter.
Uh-huh.
The topic today is, what is this thing called self? So the three of us are just going to try to take a stab at it based on our limited perspective, and then maybe open it up to the public audience to get a little bit more sharing going on after, if anybody's interested. And if not, we'll just shut it down and leave it at that. But the question really is, do we make choices, or are we products of biology and environment? You know, what is this nature-nurture thing? And do we actually have the capacity to see, make decisions, and to what extent does all that stuff happen? So with that, I want to share the 3 psychological aspects of self as they're described are cognitive, conative, and affective. So, and I'm just going to give a brief, non-technical description of those. Cognitions, what we know, like knowledge, attention, memory, evaluation, reasoning, problem solving, and things like that. And this cognitive aspect of self is both conscious and unconscious. So that's what cognition's all about. Then there's dogs that bark.
And those aren't even mine this time.
Yes. So appreciate that. Right on cue, guys. Thank you. Conation, C-O-N-A-T-I-O-N, comes from the Latin conatus, meaning any natural tendency. So these are our impulses, what we strive and our directed efforts. And then affect is the way we feel. So those are the 3 aspects of self. And I think that our focus tonight is going to be on primarily this cognitive part of ourselves that is ostensibly what we think, colloquially, what we normally think, at least as far as I know, about how we steer this little biological ship of ours through life. So the question I want to put out to both James and Helena to get us started is, are we self-aware, self-determined beings, or do we ride on that hopelessly on currents of biological and environmental stuff? Are we able to think and know and be aware of ourselves and make choices, or are those things that we think and are aware of just a reflection of something else, a shadow, a delusion? So Helena, do you want to start us out?
Well, I mean, obviously, we're self-aware, plain, right? I mean, nobody would say we aren't self-aware. It's more a matter of what is that self-awareness. At least to me, that's what the thing that's important, right? So it's more a matter of, is this self-awareness an illusion, or is it real, or does it even matter either way? But it's interesting the way you split the kinds of self up that way, because I don't think really we can do that. Like, I think that the limbic system and you know, the emotions and all of that are all part of.
Can you help describe the limbic for anybody that isn't? Yes.
I can't. I wouldn't do a very good job. But you know, let's just say emotions. the emotions are, part of decision making. I think it's a false dichotomy to say that you can separate your emotions from your decisions. I mean, if you don't have the emotions, you really can't even make a decision, it seems.
Well, I agree completely.
Well, it's very true. If you're separated from, if the emotion signals are separated from other parts of the brain, you cannot make a decision. In fact, there are people that have that kind of an issue, reason all day long, but they cannot choose. And
right.
So emotion is part of the decision-making process, at least as far as neuroscience knows today.
Yeah.
Right. So you're asking, really, is this sense of self its own thing or a real thing, or is it like a byproduct or emerging? And so in that kind of way, it's fake. There's nothing actually there. It's just an appearance that it's there. Is that what you're really getting at?
Well, I was asking sort of the open question, sort of what is this self thing, and is that self thing, that self-aware thing, the thing that governs us, or is it a reflection of things that are happening to us?
Right. Well, I mean, I've got my own opinion about that. I would be with your second option.
Which is?
It's not a thing that literally governs us. It is a, what did you call it, a reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's probably the way it really works.
I saw a really great quote, and I'm going to butcher it, so I apologize in advance, but it was about this 10-year-old kid that said, I heard somebody, this was a little girl who had been kidnapped, and this was the adult girl speaking, and she said, I heard somebody knocking on my window today. I would rather be dead than hear that sound. And I thought to myself, some of us go through experience that so deeply scar and etch themselves into our psyche that little triggers can affect us for the whole rest of our life. And so this thing we call self does get a little fuzzy at times, and I wonder if it is that reaction, or if it is something we have chosen to be. And if we can choose to be somebody, how does that happen? Because I guess you would need to craft the experiences to sort of make yourself more intentional. I think that's really the main question that we need to get at, is how do we carve out some kind of purposeful capacity to make choices and carry them out in the face of the fact that our experiences sometimes so powerfully steer us. But did I kill the room?
No, you just asked really huge questions.
Okay, so how do we somebody like tamp that down to?
Yeah, so let's break it down. So let's see. So let me see first. Are you saying if there really is no self, and this feeling of self is I don't know, a byproduct, let's just call it, right? Well, does that mean that we can't have an effect, whatever it is the self we're talking about, that self can't do anything, that it can only react?
Well, what if it's a voice in a choir? What if it does have some capacity for intention, but depending on whether or not you have the disciplines to actually translate what you would desire to do into actual behaviors is in question. So this self thing might be a passenger on a boat that is on waters without a rudder, or this self could be somebody that does have good discipline to stick that oar in the water and steer with some intentions, even though there are some outside influences. And maybe it's a gradient, a spectrum of people who are deluded to be aware, and then people who are marginally aware, and maybe some that have some better grip on it. I don't know. Maybe it is a spectrum. What do you think?
I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's an illusion or if it's real, because we know there are things we can do for sure, and regardless of whether those things are having an actual effect on a real thing that can be called self, it doesn't make any difference. And so the sort of the folk psychology idea of me and me-ness and you and you-ness and mind and all of that, it's all fine. you can just go with it, and even if it's all fake, even if none of it is real, nothing of the kind exists, it's irrelevant for the kinds of questions you're asking right now, which are, can I do anything to improve my lot in life, or can I do anything to become a better person, or to find purpose, or any of that kind of stuff. Because I think there are things that can be done, regardless of how they work, or if they're even working in any way that would lead us to believe that there's a real thing called self. So in a way, it doesn't matter. In a big way, in a huge way, it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah, well, there are people that do go around with the notion that these concepts that they have, their capacity to understand as they can, logic and reason is the thing that governs their lives. But I think, and James and I were talking about this earlier, Nietzsche had said that utilitarianism, which sort of has this notion that things that are pleasurable we chase after, and things that are painful we are adverse from and run away. But Nietzsche said, yeah, that's a great thought, but that's not what we do. In fact, we will suffer in order to belong to a group and all of that. And so I do think that this thing we call self does have some native natural waters that it swims in as we're born and grow up in the context of being a social creature, and that kind of steers some of our decisions back and forth, and it kind of shapes what it is we do. He even went as far as to say, I think, something on the order of the fact that we arrange our language with subject and object kind of puts us in a prison. I don't know if that's too much. But. So what do you think, James? What do you think of self? What do you call yourself?
Well, it's always been an interesting question for me, talking about, who am I? And what do I think I really am? To me, as I get older, the more I lean to, we like to think that we use logic and reason in many, many ways, but ultimately our amygdala is the one that controls us. We do everything out of with complete emotional attachment. Anything that we have that feels like it means something to us has to involve our emotion, because that's how we remember things. That's how we remember sitting in the kitchen with my mom every time I smell chocolate chip cookies, helping her bake them, that kind of stuff. That's the stuff that we carry through our life. It's completely based on what we feel. So our entire self is a summation, to me, of everything we've felt. Like everything that any part of our body senses in our entire lifetime is in here somewhere. And we access it without even knowing on many, many levels. Like you're talking about, triggers can set off emotions that we might not have felt for 30 years, but they're still there. And so when we try to separate self from the sum of what we have been and what we have experienced, you can't do it, because those are what make each of us unique, which is why twins can grow up in the same family and be completely different people. If we experienced everything the same way, we would all be the same, and we just don't. So I think if you try to identify a self without without a lot, understanding that, to the greatest extent I can think, we are emotion. We are an emotion, and that, I think, is how we are. Cool.
Yeah, I want to. If you guys can find,
this guy.
Pardon?
I think this guy. Is there somebody in the outside chat like that? I can't see the outside chat.
Okay, I will. That would be in the link that I sent.
Oh, that first link.
Yeah.
I can look at it.
That would be there. So
that's who she's talking about.
Yeah. So
Paranoid 1.
Yeah. So
I'll
Eric,
send you the link.
would you like to join?
Oh, okay, if I gotta remember how to do the invite thing.
You said, James, we are our emotion?
I think that this is just me. I'm not a neurologist or anything. This is just a guy speaking with a lot of years of experience.
That's cool. That's the best way to go.
Everything that has ever meant anything to me and people around me is driven by an emotional movement of some sort. We don't hold our kids valuable because that's son number one, that's son number two, that's my daughter. That's my kid, and my entire essence of my emotions is wrapped up in who that person is.
Mm.
That's how we, as a species, interact. We interact emotionally, and you see that in hangouts everywhere. No matter what the topic is, everybody has an emotional response to everything that's said, which is why people respond to guys like, pick one. And they, it can be vitriol, it can be whatever, but that's how people act. So anytime you talk about self, we have to understand that we are ultimately emotional creatures, and start from there. As I see it, I'm not sure science backs me up, but it sure feels right to me. There's that word again. How do I invite people? I don't have either. There's no little invite guy in the top.
Okay, I did invite Para into the.
Okay.
Yeah. So you said you had a perspective you want to share. I would like to, if you guys don't mind, I would just like to read a quote from David Engelman's book Incognito, and then kind of just ask a question after that. So hopefully you'll endure me stumbling through this. The first, this is the quote. The first thing we learn from studying our own circuitry is a simple lesson. Most of what we do and think and feel is not under our conscious control. Vast jungles of neurons operate their own programs. The conscious you, the I that flickers to life when you wake up in the morning, is the smallest bit of what's transpiring in your brain. Although we're dependent on the functioning of the brain for our inner lives, it runs its own show. Most of its operations are above the security clearance of the conscious mind. The I simply has no right of entry. That's the quote. So, that's a very eloquent way of saying that we're barely scratching the surface on something much deeper. So, and that's why I was saying earlier, does it seem to you, it does seem to me more and more as I study things, at least from my perspective, and I could be going down a wrong path here, but from my perspective, it does seem like we have a pretty tenuous hold on this thing we actually call self. It seems to me like it's more of a reporter and an explainer than an actual captain of the ship, so to speak. So, is it possible that it is possible it's a full-fledged illusion? I don't think it's not, but there has to be something in there that is useful, evolutionarily speaking. What is that? And what should we be focused on in order to do the thing we're supposed to be doing? Okay, and if you could solve that and third world hunger by the end of the day today, I'd appreciate it.
Well, we could have solved most of the world's problems by splitting up that $1.5 billion Powerball a little differently.
Yeah, no kidding. Did somebody win?
3 people.
3 people. Wow, great. All right, let's get back to this. So this is one of the questions I've got. So you asked a compound question, super chock full of all kinds of crap. It's good crap, but why does it matter so much whether or not there's a self to answer any of the questions that you're asking? Any of those important questions.
Yeah, it may not matter at all. It may not matter.
I mean, I don't think anything hinges on whether or not it turns out we really have a self. I mean, I think it is probably valuable to realize, and maybe many people don't, that so much of the brain so much stuff the brain is doing is without our awareness at all.
Absolutely.
You know, and you know how priming works and all kinds of things like that. That there's just a teeny tiny fraction that we're conscious of. Is probably an important thing, but other than that, what really does it matter?
Well,
we still function as if, and all of the ways that we have to sort of help ourselves along assume that there is such a thing as self, and that thing has a kind of executive control over the body, and even to the point of, you know, what kinds of things we choose to think about and stuff like that. So who cares if it's wrong?
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, no, I don't care if it's wrong either. To be honest with you, yeah. So it might be the you know, the real thing is, it might be a moot point to really explore whether or not with certainty there is a self or not a self. But I do think that there is some utility, some usefulness in understanding the mechanisms by which our life experience is steered, and what we do have in terms of this thing we call self does play a role in that. I think that I know from my own experience that I have made decisions to not do things that I used to do that have bettered my life, and it wasn't just a matter of just thinking and making a choice. There was a whole lot of that other stuff that you got to feel it, you got to drive it, you got to make it happen. You have to recognize that setbacks are not utter defeat, and all of that sort of stuff, and have perseverance and whatnot. So you kind of got to cultivate that movement towards something intentional, at least as far as I've been able to discover. And I think it's important to understand and negotiate with this thing called self so that it actually can be more intentional. Because I know that I'm more intentional than I used to be. Mm-hmm. Not quite as intentional as I'd like to be, but I certainly have made progress. And
okay, so what do you see as the difference? So you're talking about you have become more intentional. How can you rephrase that in terms of self? Do you think that means you've been able to, I don't know, enlist the sense of self to do more executive control over the other aspects of you?
Well, was it Plato? I think it was Plato that had the analogy of the cave. Do you remember who that? It doesn't really matter. I'm not, you know, but the idea being that most of us live in the shadows with the illusion that we actually see things, but we're not seeing things well. And the idea is to know yourself so that you can actually come out into the light and see things with some relative clarity. So,
but you don't need to know yourself to come out into the light.
Now, wait a minute. I'm trying to get to the point here, and
okay.
I apologize for the circuitous way that I'm doing it. But the point that I was trying to make is I began to understand that I was a reflection of the things that happened to me, and I was a response agent, just mirroring back what I had picked up to resonate, sort of like a guitar that is struck with a certain chord. And in my own particular case, I didn't get dealt the best hand, so it was a sour chord in many respects. And I had to actually make some choices to begin to steer it in another direction. And that wasn't an easy proposition to grapple with the fact that you can't just decide something and make it happen in your own life. And so I really had to wrestle with this thing, you know, that a lot of people would call identity in order to sort of get a grip on the wheel. And that wasn't easy. And so I think the self was involved there in some respects. So whether or not, and awareness was part of that. So recognizing that I was a reflection of my environment, and then saying, wait a minute, so that means that when I have these trigger events and I'm feeling this stuff, it's a function of what was percolated already into my system. And so I can then at least, you know, use my intellectual faculties to say, you're experiencing this. Yes, you do have the butterflies in your stomach, and you know whatever your reaction is, but you have to choose to do this thing at first. And then once I began choosing that discipline, the emotions, because that changed my experience, then the emotional parts and stuff started following along. And so to me, that was the dawning of this self that was actually able to steer And I don't mean to, I'm not trying to claim that I'm any kind of master of ceremonies at life or anything. I'm just saying, compared to what I was, I've made progress. That's all I'm trying to lay claim to. And that was where I think it came from, and that involved the self.
That's so interesting, because what you've just said is, once I realized that the self was only reacting, then suddenly it could be the actor more easily.
At least that was.
So that must have mean that you were going on an assumption that it was acting. So the realization was, oh, wait a second, I'm not doing any acting. I'm just reacting, but I could act if I wanted.
Yes, even though I thought I was acting. I thought that the way that I was responding was, I don't know, accurate or whatever. I see this, and then here's how I respond, and it's destructive, but the reason is everybody else, not me. I'm a spectator.
Right.
Well, they have another word for that, Joe.
Sorry, Jim.
So
Perry, you had a theory.
Well, as I said in the chat, I have borderline personality disorder. And one of the unfortunate bits of that can come about is not a split personality, but being aware of separate processes. So it's like it's not one harmonious voice or action or reaction going through my head. I'm actually aware of my emotive side, my reasonable side, as well as separately my physical side. And each thread of information and reaction and analyzing from that is a separate stream within my full cognition. It's more like a chorus, like somebody mentioned earlier about that what we perceive as a single consciousness or cognition is actually more of the chorus in our head. And I fully agree with that. Like with some of the things that happens with me is my body will attempt to do two things at once based upon what I'm doing in a reasoned way, and then a emotive thought will come through and my body will try to go do that while I'm in the middle of something else. Right? But I had kind of an experience as you did, Joe, where you realize that yourself
is being carted as opposed
to being carted along instead of being the driver in the cart. And let's just say my whole personality matrix, everything was a house of cards that crumbled, and I kind of reset. But I went from a core of who I was, and I put it down to my mental filter, how I learn, how I filter all the input coming in from whatever reality is. And I bought into some lovely, interesting stuff. I profess to be a psychic, so spirit divination, all that fun stuff. But as I re-experienced similar things, I was then able to recognize, wait a minute, I had an emotive response this way. That time I knew how it resolved, so I was more able, like you were put, to steer my boat or my cart. Not, of course, not some grandmaster or anything, though there was a really interesting 2 years, which was friggin' amazing, but it was like a religious experience without, I actually described it to somebody who said, yeah, that sounds like you're on LSD.
So you said you professed to be a psychic. Do you mean you really thought you were, or you were running a scam on people?
Oh no, I thought I was a special snowflake able to pick up on all of these vibrations in the universe. The force is a good way.
Okay, so when you thought that's what was happening, you interpreted the inputs, let's call them, one way. And then after whatever it was that happened, you realized that really probably isn't what's happening. Those same inputs came to you, right? How did you see those differently? What made the difference in the way you were interpreting things?
I will give a perfect example. One time I was involved in a exorcism of a building. Bad spirits in the bar. And one thing that happened was a picture flew off the wall. Nobody around it. But I realized after going through memories, being forced to go through memories, anyway, I realized that 30 seconds after that picture flew off the wall, somebody actually came out of that room. But I totally ignored it. I was stuck on the event. And that's it. And my feeling over the event, that it just washed over any cognitive process to go further in logic and reason and actually think, oh, wait a minute. But that's what happened after I reviewed the memories. Like, wait a minute, she walked out of there. She hit the wall. The picture flew off.
You knew that she had, when, I may be getting a little too nitpicky for the topic, but I'm just curious. When did you realize that somebody had walked out? Immediately, or is this like after my transition, later. I reflected on it, and in fact, somebody walked out of that room?
Mm-hmm. I had to do it in review. I had to do it. I was deep in introspection and reevaluating every. Technical terms, it was probably a psychotic break. I put it like a computer rebooting. Still has all the hardware, still has all the software, but it loads differently in different areas of memory and that sort of thing. And I was able to separate myself in the review because I didn't have the same emotive weight because it was separate. It had been severed. So I was able to dispassionately review and make the connections that my emotions got in the way because of me feeling that I was special because of professing and being very good at the time, being a psychic. I know what I was doing now, cold reading.
Right.
Right. Okay, so you're describing now, from your perspective now, what you were doing back then was either a compensation or a reflection of some pain or angst or whatever was going on?
Both. Both. I was, my environment growing up was not just controlled, but a ping-ponging between a mother that tried to remind me that I could be me, and a father which was taking away all value of accomplishment, all everything.
Do you think that that was a reflection of someone who was cruel, a criminal that needed punished, or somebody who was wounded that was just passing along? Like, is that a hurt people situation? Do you think, or in other words, I know my own upbringing had a lot of pains like you're describing. I don't mean to compare them necessarily, but to say that they did powerfully steer and influence my life in a lot of ways. And as an adult, I was able to retool the way that I perceived it from somebody who was a criminal that needed punished or at least hated or whatever, and that sort of thing, to somebody that was wounded and malnourished, and they were just echoing that wound, and I got caught in the crossfire of that. And that was helpful to me to understand that it wasn't about me, because and look, every kid thinks it's about you. Can tell a kid whatever you want, but it's all about them. We're born thinking it's all about us, so everything that happens is about us. that's the native program that we get. And so I had to retool that, and I don't know whether those things are delusional or not, or whether I'm letting somebody off the hook when I shouldn't, or any of that, but I know that it was useful to me to think it that way.
Sorry. I think in your case that would be useful. It's like medication, okay? Like antidepressants, not all of them work forever. Actually, for me, none of them have worked. So, but they made me worse. And that's from a clinical side. Either send me more aggravated or but that's neither here nor there. But in your case, that method worked. For me, I had to do it all actually through forgiveness.
Yeah.
And not forgiveness of them. Forgiveness of myself for not being able to know better at the time and do different. Not in a blaming way, you know, but just because I recognize, yes, there were options that I just couldn't see.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, can I?
But hang on, let me just finish that thought. But I applied that also to my parents because somebody helped make them. So I did it through understanding the lineage, because I do not envy the beatings my father certainly got from his mother.
Yeah.
So I was just an extension of his, not of his habits. I won't say criminal, but in your case, that may help you get over certain things.
Yeah, I think you articulated a very similar thing to mine and brought in something that I had neglected to actually say, and I'm kind of glad you did, because that makes me think too that I did kind of have to change my relationship with myself, because I did condemn myself for some of those echoes of pain that I expressed on my own social landscape, and I hurt other people just by virtue of the fact that I was kind of sort of struck to be a caustic person in certain relationship ways. So
same here. I mean, I hurt a lot of people in my professed psychic days because I was controlling them. No matter what I said to get them not to listen to me, they still listened. So I would have affected their lives. I mean, I know one instance where two friends split up in the time frame that I gave them. It was I picked up on certain things, I'm sure, in the relationship. That was their friendship, which I could predict, analyze, and predict, give a prediction for the future. That would take about this time frame with these two type of personalities with this type of friction, right? It was a slow burn relationship.
So if I could summarize in terms of what I'm hearing you say, you changed your relationship with yourself, and that changed your life. Is that a fair statement?
It did. It shifted my thinking slightly, well, to the left, really. That's a political statement more than anything. But it was a slight shift of, hey, it's not all about me.
It's interesting.
And that includes with myself, sorry.
No, you're describing being able to create distancing yourself from yourself, so that you can take a third-person view of yourself in a way that you can do of others.
Yeah.
But yet, you said it took introspection, which is very interesting, right? But as far as techniques go, it seems that we've at least come across one, right? Work on creating distance so that you can watch yourself as a third person. And I think that it's true that it does cause more compassion for yourself, because most people are generally, I don't know about most people, but a lot of people, let's say, harder on themselves, and that you wouldn't ever say the things you say to yourself to another person who's going through what it is that you're going through. And so there's a technique right there, right? Practice distancing yourself when you look at yourself.
I do want to say one thing. I don't think it's creating distance. How I understand it is how I perceive it is understanding what is blame and what is responsibility. And the two do not go together. Very infrequently they go together. And most of the blame I found was blame not of my own making. Mm. So I was able to release it. And the distance that resulted was its own creation, right?
This distinction between blame and responsibility is very much related to this whole issue of, is there a controlling self or not?
There is.
Very, so in that respect, maybe it is important to decide if there is a real self or not. Because that has implications on our justice system and all kinds of things.
Agreed. as I put in the chat earlier, I see not free will. I see that we make decisions, which is a mix between cognitive choice and compulsion or our habits, what we're programmed to do in a knee-jerk aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I think how we proceed is in a combination. I know Ozzy mentioned something in a thread a while ago. I asked him to explain. He did a brief synopsis. Yeah, I wish I could remember the exact thread, Ozzy, but on it. But yeah, I know also that some things in philosophy, there's a name for how I kind of put it, what I describe in philosophy. I can't remember what the name was. So I'm
You were
not
explaining the
academia at all.
distinction. I was calling it distancing, and you were saying not exactly, it's something else. Can you tell a little bit more of what is the other thing you think it is?
Well, I think we have three aspects of our personality. Who we are is aspects of three main things, and possibly, probably three main processes. One primarily being the body. That is our input-output. That is where everything comes in. We react, we use, in all aspects. I think it has its own processing where, the autonomic functions with breathing, blinking, and that sort of thing. The nervous system, which responds not only from our brain, but both ways from different organs that they're showing, like our stomachs or the gut area. There's other aspects, I think, up here as well as possibly the eyes themselves have their own neural translation, as it were. I know I'm describing that badly, but it's a biofeedback mechanism, basically. But so the body has its own processing and perspective. Then our, for lack of a better phrase, higher processing, the gray matter, works on two main aspects of the information coming in, and that is how I would put a selfless and a selfish. And then it's a mixture of all three, and depending on experiences, puts our own personal biases towards one way or another on any association of memory, of experience, action, reaction, so it comes into our thoughts. But it's a three perspective, a tertiary system, rather than any sort of binary or just full on bang bang.
Yeah, I'd like to. I do know that they've done some. I forget what the thing is called. Transcranial magnetic resonance imaging, where, as it turns out, we human beings are, unsurprisingly, we hold on to ideological convictions with greater intensity in the aftermath of a threat. Okay, and so our experiences certainly do play a role in carving what it is that we think is important and what it is that we don't think is important, what it is that we can have some more tolerance for, if you will, and what it is that we're really triggered by, what it is we get upset over. And so with all of that going on, I think we also inherit probably some cultural echoes of that. So, in our entire culture, there's going to be things that are acceptable or viewed as disgusting, depending on the culture we're given in. And so with all of that, I think those things do steer our lives, and getting a grip on that can be a challenge. I can only say from my own experience, making a real sincere effort to understand myself as a passenger was part of the process that helped me get a direction, at least, to have a hand in steering the wheel as well.
My last psychologist, I said, I'm sitting in my driver's seat when I'm focused.
Yeah, but I also know when it's going back to the transcranial, I forget what the name of it is, but if they can turn on and off certain aspects of the brain, and that will actually change our relationship with ourself. And so there's sort of a, this weird connection of non-duality that must be going on, at least from my perspective, using evidence as a basis, that that what is working inside of our heads has a lot to do with how we experience life or not. So you can actually get people to give up their religious beliefs, according to some studies that have been done, just based on which area of the brain is being stimulated and or dampened down, mediated. So
or enforce them.
Yeah.
Everything becomes a religious experience or a spiritual one.
Yeah. God helmet.
Yeah. They've also done internet telekinesis and controlling the movements of somebody else's body through the same magnetic induction on specific parts of the brain. It takes a little training because you have to focus the movement because we do it so automatically. It's like asking a concert pianist, how do you play so well? I just do it. And actually, that's an interesting thing to bring up too. The sense of self is not, part of the reason why I think there's a mental process to the physical is because we also seem to have a sense of where we are where our body is in all of our parts. That's why we don't stick our finger in our eye while we're touching our nose and things like that. We can extend it in things like instruments, a car. If you know your car well, you know exactly where an inch is. We make an extension of our own body, as it were.
The muscle, yeah, exactly, Joe. The muscles have proprioceptors in them that tell us where our body is in space. And we can train those, and we learn how to use that phenomenon when we play sports, when we do anything. Muscle memory is just a reconditioning of proprioception. So there's nothing more. There's nothing more to it than that. It's just part of the way our muscles work.
I wonder if we could get Ozzy's perception on this. Ozzy, do you think that there's room for choice in the eye of this biological storm, or are we along for the ride? Does it matter? And can you solve third world hunger by the end of the day, please? Thank you.
Well, let's start with the easy problem first, third world hunger.
I think that is an easy problem to solve, but that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, yes, I think we're along for the ride, and yes, there's room for choice. I'm a compatibilist, which means I believe both determinism and I believe in a robust sense of the will. But in a way, that's kind of a little orthogonal to the whole talk of the self. It's funny because I was just about to mention proprioception. I was going to sort of jump in with proprioception. For people who don't know, proprioception is the sense of bodily awareness, of bodily positioning. I mean, if I get up out of this chair right now, I don't have to look to see where my legs are or anything like that. I know that my legs are down there at the end of my feet, and I know where they are in space, and I can just get up and walk. The reason you can walk is because your body has a kind of body image. Your brain carries with it a kind of body image. You know how you're oriented in space, right? There are occasions where that gets kind of messed up, like if you take a nap and you wake up and you've sort of been sleeping on your arm or something in some uncomfortable position, and you've lost feeling in your arm, right? You can literally not know where your arm is, right? And you can actually touch your arm with your other arm, and it feels like it's not part of you, right? Because you're not getting the proper feedback, but you're also not getting proprioception. You literally don't even know where your arm is in space. And there are some people who, unfortunately, due to neurological malfunctions, lose the sense of proprioception. And try to imagine what that's like. You have to get up out of a chair. You have to look to see, where is my hand? Okay, I'm going to put my hand on the armrest. I'm going to put my other hand on the armrest. If you want to reach for a cup, you can't just reach for the cup. You have to look to see where your hand is first, because for all you know, your hand's over here, right? So I think proprioception actually is fundamental to our basic concept of the self, of who we are, because we are first and foremost physical beings, right? And so I think the sense of self originated in organisms that didn't have any of the higher cognitive faculties that we had, but at least had some way of representing to themselves how their bodies were positioned, where their bodies began and ended. You know, what is part of my body and what is not part of my body. So I think the sense of self is sort of when we're talking about it in this discussion, is sort of a much higher level of abstraction, right? A much higher cortical layers on top of this basic platform of our physicality. But to answer your question more directly, yeah, I think that I am along for the ride, because I think I am my brain, and probably brains cause minds, and so I think that the sequence of mental events that I'm experiencing right now and that you are experiencing right now is all occasioned by stuff going on in the wetware between your ears, and but there are systems in that wetware that govern other events in that wetware, and therein lies our sense of choice, of decision making, right? But none of that is sort of uncoupled from causally deterministic laws, right? So I think that yes, we do make choices. There are parts of our brains that are give us the capacity to deliberate between courses of action that we can imagine and deliberate between, right? We can choose between imagined courses of actions, and we can anticipate possible consequences of those actions. And now we don't get to decide what we're going to decide. We just decide. But we don't decide what we're going to decide. We just decide. That deciding, that's what we call the will, right? But a lot of people would like it to be that, no, not only do you decide what your actions are going to be, but you get to decide that you're going to decide, and you're going to get to decide what you decide. No, that I don't think we do. I mean, I don't even know how I get to decide what I decide. If you ask me to pick a number from 1 to 10 just randomly, and I pick a number, I pick the number 6. I don't know why I picked the number 6. Maybe I can come up with a reason, right? But maybe I chose the number 6 because I saw the number 6 on a road sign moments ago, and it was uppermost in my mind or something like that. But I had no say in why that was uppermost in my mind, right? I mean, so I think determinism goes all the way down, but I still think that we make decisions, we still deliberate, we still make choices, and we can be held accountable for those, and should be held accountable for those, because punishment and reward, incentivization and disincentivization, are the levers of behavioral control. That's how you motivate people to change their behavior, right? And this machine up here, it governs behavior.
All people, because I think some people actually have an image of they are attracted to this negative feedback, and their expectation sort of drives it, so they actually return to the negative thing. Like, for instance, I'm sure there's an alcoholic out there somewhere who's like, I don't want to drink anymore, I swear I'm going to quit, and yet they return to this negative thing, and then if you punish them for it, that's part of the cycle too. And maybe that's a poor example to lump everything into, but I'm just saying that there are people that do have this expectation of reality that they seem to, underneath the surface, move themselves to cultivate the confirmation of that negative expectation that they're going to do things about themselves that they themselves don't like, and then hate themselves for it, and run in that cycle of doing things for which they reinforce their own negative image of themselves. I hope I'm being clear. I mean, I'm saying, you're saying that the utilitarian view, I think, is that we chase after the positive thing, and we are averted by the negative thing. But that's not true for everybody.
I would. Okay, let me qualify it then, because you're absolutely correct. What I mean, though, is that, okay, I'm not going to withdraw what I said, but let's understand it a little bit more. Let's take into account exactly what you described, that in the course of our lives we can come to find weird things reinforcing, right? Like self-loathing, right, can be rewarding. Some people are actually like beating themselves up, right, psychologically, right? Something that is negative to one person can be positive to another, right? There are certain things like the sense of moral outrage. For some people, the sense of feeling moral outrage is kind of like, ugh, that's kind of an ugly feeling. You know, you're kind of angry. But for some people, the sense of moral outrage is intoxicating. It makes them feel really superior, and they get high on it, and they can never get enough of condemning other people or condemning society, or and so
Drama queen.
yeah, well, I think of drama queens, of people who will complain incessantly of being persecuted, but will put themselves in circumstances where they're constantly entangled with people who they know are going to, push their buttons, right? And they just, why can't you just walk away, right? And it's because we can be fetishistic about what we find enjoyable. One can enjoy taking a beating, right? And I mean, and if that sounds like weirdly kinky and masochistic, just think of what it's like when you go to the gym, right? I mean, when I go to the gym regularly and I get into it, I like that feeling of hurting, right? I mean, if that feeling were to arise in any other circumstance, I wouldn't like it at all. But in that circumstance, I actually like the feeling of being in pain, the feeling of lactic acid buildup and that burn and all that. That actually feels good, right? So we can, in fact, learn to like things that are actually not good for us, that are really, really bad for us. Those can sort of push us in the wrong direction into completely maladaptive behaviors and maladaptive situations and immiserating situations. So I still think that we sort of get pushed and pulled in the direction of this is pleasurable and this is aversive and we should avoid it. It's just that we can get really, really we can differ drastically in what we find attractive and what we find aversive. It's not one size fits all,
Yeah, but wouldn't you say that there are people that are trapped in a prison of this cycle of self-loathing? In other words, being somehow impulsively driven, like an OCD person, being compulsively driven to do something which they then have a cycle of self-loathing for. And just as an example, I've observed this behavior that some people do have a tendency to be corrected by retributive kind of a justice thing, where don't do that because maybe they've been spanked as a child out of love, but somebody that was brought up in an atmosphere or climate of betrayal and abuse and all of that can have many more drivers in their own life that have them impulsively doing things which reconstruct this familiar environment, even though that familiar environment is toxic. That's all, so I'm trying to get at this whole spectrum of this thing we're calling self, that part of it is an underneath motivation thing that carries us on a current.
I can give a personal example, actually. It can be a little weirdly confessional, but I have this weird thing. When I was a young man, I had a hard time getting a girlfriend. I had a hard time getting a girl to look at me. Like I was like 19 years old before I could get a girl to look at me, dance with me, hold my hand, kiss me. I mean, like my first girlfriend was like at 19, and before that I hadn't even kissed a girl. Like nothing. I couldn't get a girl to dance with me at a dance, and believe me, I tried. And I mean, up until I sort of had my first girlfriend, I was a bit of a mess. I was sort of eaten up by the fact that all my friends could had girlfriends and seemed to not be languishing in loneliness, and nothing I wanted more in the world than to have a girlfriend. And I've sort of gone through life being a kind of unremarkable looking fellow, but I've been lucky in love, right? But I'm not the kind of guy who sort of turns a lot of heads. Those early experiences that I had really conditioned me in a weird way. And it's something that I've only really become very consciously aware of in the last year. In the last year, I've become, and it's because of my time on the internet, I've become acutely aware that people sort of couple up, that people flirt and stuff like that, and it doesn't happen to me. This is not a call, an invitation for people to do that, but what I mean is, I sort of feel that, and one of the ways that my coping mechanisms is to kind of put myself down publicly about it. Right, I make jokes all the time about not being sexy and not being attractive and stuff like that. And the thing is, that it actually feels good to do that. I sort of feel like there's a release valve when I do that. Right, I feel like right. In other words, there's a bit of self-flagellation going on there. I'm sort of beating myself on the back about not being dreamy looking, and sort of envious of guys like Scott Clifton who are just too good looking to believe. And but it's sort of like I'm rewarding myself by punishing myself, by putting myself down. It is the weirdest thing, and I've only become aware of this. I mean, I'm 50 years old now. I've only become aware of this now. But I know I've been doing this my whole life, right? And it's absolutely a terrible thing to do. I mean, nobody finds this attractive, right? I don't find it attractive in others. I don't find it attractive in myself. But I really wasn't aware that I was actually getting some gratification out of it, and that's why I've been doing it. I mean, there's something perverse about it, right? But anyway, it's a weird thing. So is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think you're hitting the nail on the head, at least from my perspective, where you're saying that we can be tooled to have some sort of a perverse attraction towards those things which are painful. It's some sort of a dichotomy of wonderfulness, but I think maybe it might be better to say something on the order of, we develop an expectation of how reality exists, and then we go around cultivating that expectation so that it kind of happens. So if you felt awkward and that was bothering you, somehow it would slip out in your personality and your behavior profile and what you said periodically and all of that. At least that was what I feel like was true for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the question of, are we a mixture of self-determination and predetermination, I think the answer to that would be yes. I mean, is that a sort of a consensus in the room?
For me, yeah, definitely so.
Yeah, is there a way to move the needle from, flowing on the currents to becoming more intentional? Like, I know I describe my own experiences as moving along on the spectrum toward being a little more intentional as I grew older and developed some disciplines. I reckon, one of the most powerful things I recognized was the fact that the thing that crafted me into the person that I was, riding on the currents predominantly, was experiences. And so what I tried to do was strategically construct the experiences that would then reshape me in a different way. And at first I had to be doing it by cognition alone, in other words, by choice. I would say, I know that my normal thing is to get really mad at this situation and become really clever and really biting and really surgical and really hurt that person because I'm really upset. And you know what? I'm really not going to do that anymore. And so I began to tamp that down so that I didn't necessarily lash out. And it began changing the relationships in my world in a more nourishing direction, for lack of a better word.
I think the needle can be. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead.
No, thanks, Ozzy. No, I agree that the needle can definitely be shifted. My biggest thing is go after your own bullshit. Listen to yourself as much as you listen to others, because once you're talking and moving around, recognize what you're doing in your output. Listen to it. Look at it. Ask, wait a minute, why did I go in my stomach when I said that? Do I disagree? I think I do after I think about it. Maybe that was bullshit. Maybe I better correct myself after thinking it through more. Because we'll react to our own bullshit. We know when we're lying to ourselves, and we will emote it. I mentioned the cold reading when I professed to be a psychic. That's what I was doing. I see microexpressions, the flow of body language and facial language and macro expressions and all of that. I pick up on. I'm now better at it because I'm not inserting myself into it. It's not totally accurate, of course, because you're always missing stuff and you don't know the full context. But you can build a basic storyline because we are all humans. We are built on a rather typical template. we are all unique because we are a mix of things in that template, not just physical wiring, but experiences, which brings out aspects of how a human will react. It is like infinite. We have infinite personalities, but the human brain can only do a finite amount of things, and the body can only react in a finite amount of ways. And the body speaks as much as our mouths.
Yeah, my own personal theory of self is somewhere on the order of, I think there's echoes of things. Like, for instance, a lot of animals have eyes and ears and, you know, these sensory organs to help us navigate. And also, there's kind of this thematic thing where our body, biologically speaking, will go into growth mode and maintenance mode and all of that sort of stuff unless it faces what it perceives of as a trauma, and then everything gets redirected to dealing with that trauma. And I think that our self goes into that mode. So we can develop a personality that is the, you know, our emotional prosody, the kind of the color, the climate of our emotion can be steered toward that which is kind of fight or flighty. So we'll develop this personality that attempts to control. Maybe a hoarder is attempting to protect themselves in a cocoon, and that itself might be that fight or flight mechanism, some sort of a protective kind of prosody that develops in a personality in order to deal with this perceived trauma. And then once we have something etched that deeply, we're going to try to we are going to project that into the future. Hey, that happened to us before, it could happen to us again. My gosh, what do we need to do to protect ourselves? That can be a lot of the core, I think, in terms of these self things that develop maladaptive relationship dynamics that are built on control rather than commitment.
I've got a perfect example of that. My father, not only was he raised by a stereotypical British schoolmarm, and he was raised to be her, in World War I, the best boy, the little prince by her side, all that. He was also gay, so closeted. So he had two issues going. But one instance of control mechanisms, I asked my mother before she passed, regardless of anything my brother and I are now, at the start, were we adopted to placate you? And she agreed that we were. It would also conveniently fit the image. Now, he didn't necessarily cognitively say, I'm going to adopt kids to hide the fact that I'm gay, right? He would have been, it's for the wife and everything, but then again, he also paid her $10 a week to manage the store that he owned. So, you know.
I forget what the Freudian term for that is.
Well, the only way to control yourself is to control your environment, because that way you know what's there you can or have to react to. So surprises aren't very welcome. But yeah, control mechanisms are a big projection of what we can't accept in ourselves, what we're hiding from, what we're running from, whether it be a demon of our own creation or blamed for. And that's why I made the separation, because a lot of people, I mean, just look at the atheists on YouTube, projection all around to us. We're all these devil pedophiles.
How do you mean? I'm curious what your perspective is there.
I'm sorry?
How do you mean, like, you're saying that atheists and you use the word projection? I'm just curious how you meant.
I meant that people love to project their emotions upon another person in the power struggle of being on top, right? They put you down or try to put you down in culture. And I'm not just speaking of atheism, but like being the son of a game man in the 70s was no fun. Sins of the father type thing, right? So, I mean, a lot of blame that a person thinks they have isn't theirs. It's somebody else's. It's their judgments. It's their perception. It's not you, but we buy into their bullshit, which then affects the self and your own decisions.
Right. So do you think you got out of the box to some degree? That meaning you were able to get a grip?
Oh yeah. Well, when I went through the I mentioned earlier, the best way to describe it is psychotic break, I also conflated to a walkabout, a successful walkabout, because I was forced into myself naked, basically, and had to accept me as who I was and did and everything. Not something I wish upon my worst enemy, but it's it's a process, and then you start relearning yourself after something like that. And kind of like you mentioned earlier, in a simple sense, you're reprogramming yourself.
Actually, I like this idea of reprogramming yourself, actually, because I'm not sort of particularly crazy about the computational theory of mind and that kind of model of the sort of the mind-body problem and all that. But there is something attractive about this idea of a computer that that is self-reprogramming, right? That has a self-reprogramming database or something like that. Because of course we can do that. I mean, all sort of cognitive therapy and Freudian therapy, all these sorts of things. That's what you're supposed to be able to do. The idea is that you're falling into some patterns. You're sleepwalking through life. You're just doing what you do. You're not attending to it, right? And one of the big, it's funny because when I started in school, one of the first things I encountered in psychology was Freudian psychology and Jungian psychology. I got really, really taken up with this stuff and dream analysis and reading stuff into jokes and slips of the tongue and parapraxis and all of that kind of stuff. And I really got into that. One of the things that was interesting though was I never came away with any valuable insights into my own psychology. I felt like I was able to explain other people's behaviors perfectly well, but it seemed to afford me nothing, right? And the thing that worked best for me, where I felt I had made some progress on myself, not a lot, but some, was Buddhism and this concept of mindfulness and attention to yourself, and sort of think about what you're saying. Don't just talk. You should only talk when you have something to say. Something I don't actually follow very well, but something I should follow better. But the key to being more intentional, just sliding this dial over, right, from sort of being an automaton sleepwalking through life to a self-directed, self-reprogramming system, is the key to being more intentional is being more attentional. You just have to attend to yourself. You have to watch yourself. But in my view, it has to be just almost a passive perception. For me, you can't be in the grips of a theory about how the mind works, right? To the extent that I was in the grips of a theory about how the mind works and what the parts of, and the id, the ego, and the superego, and the thanatos and eros and all these impulses and urges, that completely screwed up my ability to analyze myself and to just observe the facts. What the heck am I doing? What am I feeling? Right? It's actually not that hard to attend to what you're feeling, right? And one of the things that's weird about attending to what you're feeling, just do it for a pain. The next time you feel pain, this is really kind of a weird thing. It's a weird phenomenological experiment. The next time you feel a pain, you bang an elbow or something like that, or you have a headache or whatever it is, right? Just think about the pain. Focus on the pain. Attend very consciously and deliberately on the pain. Train your attention on the pain. And one of the weird things that happens is you feel dissociated from the pain. It's as if the pain hurts less. It's the weirdest thing. And it happens every friggin' time I do it. Nevertheless, when I'm in pain, it is not my first instinct to think, well, here's a way to manage the pain, is to dissociate myself a little bit from it by becoming aware that I'm having this experience, that this experience is sort of passing by on the conveyor belt of my mind. Just watch it go by, come and go. Oh, here comes another jab, here comes another stab. It actually helps. And I think that being attentional should be understood as that kind of passive observation. It creates distance, and then you can recognize patterns and see things. Oh man, I'm really screwing up. And of course, it's kind of odd because the vocabulary that they use is often of being in the moment. But in a way, being in the moment means being divorced from yourself and looking at yourself, right? It's kind of a weird thing. It sounds like a contradiction, but you are in a sense. What's that?
Driver's seat.
Yeah, that's right. So that for me has sort of been helpful, to sort of get myself to direct my life a little more. I mean, I suck at it like everybody does, but to the extent that I've made some progress, I've made a lot of progress because of that. And actually, studying philosophy has been helpful too. Like, a lot of people think that I'm kind of very calm and bloodless, and I'm not. And people who know me long enough know that that's not the case. But a lot of people think that I'm kind of flat of affect and bloodless. But that's purely a function of having studied philosophy, and you deal with arguments so much that you come to sort of take the arguments for your own position and hold them at arm's length, just like you do any other argument. You can entertain any old argument and evaluate it and argue for or against it, and you come to be able to do that for yourself. But you can actually do that with just about everything in your life, everything that you feel. It's just really, really hard. And like Joe said, as soon as you find yourself threatened or hurting, right? It's just like, when something hurts, right away, your entire index of priorities changes. All of a sudden, I'm in self-defense mode. I've got to make sure I guard this wound, and I let nothing injure this. And as soon as something is an assault on your ego or something like that, the same thing happens, and you stop thinking. It's very hard to attend to what you're feeling, and you start reacting out of hurt. You just respond reflexively. So I think the key is, of course, mindfulness, and mindfulness I think has to be, or should be understood as, a kind of passive attention and just observation of what is passing through your mind right now, which is hard to do when you're scared or you're humiliated or you're hurt. I mean, I've done, just recently some stupid stuff because I was hurt, right? Really hurt, and it's impossible to be rational and to direct yourself, and you just sort of are lashing out. You're like a puppet on strings. You're like a piano key,
And if you at that point kick in your self-awareness, your mindfulness, and that can be controlled. I do that every night actually when I lay down to sleep. I have to move the focus around to be able to get away from the passion. Otherwise, I don't sleep.
That's interesting. I had a bad. I barely slept last night because something happened that upset me, and I mean, I just couldn't get past it. I mean, it literally kept me up. I wish I'd had the presence of mind, so to speak, to just say, okay, now just look at this, just feel this, let yourself feel this, let yourself feel it fully, right? Let it wash over you and let it go by, and it, provide some distance so that you can think about it more clearly, and sort of not just respond reflexively,
It's like the pain you were talking about. You dive into it. In one way, I think I can say that you accept the pain, therefore you worry about it less. Because I don't think I'm not amiss, if I remember correctly, anxiety to the brain also activates the pain centers, if I remember correctly. So anxiety is a form of pain. Anguish is pain.
Anxiety stimulates cortisol release from the adrenal glands. So, and what happens is, if you've got any kind of muscles or something that's achy and sore, the cortisol levels will increase, and you will feel that. So that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah,
so it's not that you're... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The one thing that came to mind is that 90% of what we feel as pain is actually anxiety of the pain or thought of the pain, rather than the actual pain.
I read an interesting thing.
Sure,
like, I read something interesting in connection with this about people who suffer anxiety, who take anxiety-relieving drugs. Those people are really good at figuring out what makes them anxious, right? But I wish I could remember the details of the study, but the study had looked at people who take anxiety medications and compared them with people who don't take anxiety medications, but who experience a lot of anxiety. And what it found was that the people who take anxiety medication were way better at figuring out what was making them anxious, right? Because they knew, this is happening, I'm going to need a pill, right? So there was this weird thing, but the thing was they weren't good at managing their anxiety. They had a pharmacological way of managing their anxiety, but they were really good at identifying the things that made them anxious or were likely to make them anxious. We were likely like, this is going to make me anxious. I can tell. They knew, right? Because they knew, this is going to happen. I need to get some pills, you know.
So the body will help tell them.
Yeah, but they had, because they had to take a pill, because they knew there was a remedy for anxiety that they could take that would work in fairly short order. They were able to associate the triggers of anxiety, and they were in a way more aware of the things that were anxiety inducing in their lives and their reaction to anxiety triggers than people who had no medications, right? So it's kind of funny. It's kind of paradoxical. Here you had a group of people who were particularly bad at managing anxiety in their lives because they've got this quick and dirty pharmacological remedy, and that's not to cast aspersions on people who need to take those things. There are people who do need to take these things, but at the same time, these people who were, because of these medications, the best trained at knowing what was triggering them and stuff like that, were not particularly good at avoiding these triggers or making sure that this didn't happen. I guess because they had a fix.
Well, also they haven't learned how they fall into them, the patterns of that, right? Because they're still in a similar environment than they were previously when those anxieties got built. So they can anticipate the pattern of their environment. Like, take alcoholics. Okay, if the environment doesn't shift away from an alcoholic environment, you're going to go back to drinking. That's why there's Al-Anon now. I disagree with both of them because they do the higher power thing, but that's another story. But the thing is, you can't. If you live in a shit heap and always get sick, you won't get better until you move out of the shit heap. To put it
Can I? I'd like to share just a little story that I heard. This is a true story. This lady had some amygdala damage. She could not form long-term memory. She remembered things for about 15-minute window, and then whatever it was would evaporate. So her situation we were talking about mindfulness, and so her situation was always in the now. In fact, the doctor had to reintroduce himself every day. This new person came in and would shake her hand and introduce himself and ask how she's doing and so on. And then the next day, the same thing happened that she would forget because the emotional centers weren't there to translate short-term into long-term memories. Well, one day, the doctor took a thumbtack and put it inside his hands, and when he shook her hand, of course, it caused a little pain, and she drew back away. And the next day when he went to shake her hand, she drew back. And that story stuck with me. And the reason it stuck with me is because there does seem to be this whole other self. And I know that's just one little anecdotal story, but there does seem to be this whole other self that are episodic memories and echoes of those, and we sort of negotiate them as if they're this climate that we live in, and that our self sort of has the capacity to maybe negotiate that well. Maybe we know how to put our sail up and deal with those winds and stuff effectively, and maybe we're just lost at sea. And I think there's a difference between those two things, of somebody that's just drifting on the open waters and somebody that has a measure of control. And I do think that part of that is mindfulness, or at least self-awareness. I think of the broad bracket of self-awareness, which is why I think the things that we're pursuing here and now are so important, because they actually do have some meaningful impact. I mean, they might not be as exciting as watching a Jerry Springer-esque meltdown on the internet, but I think that they are subtly and more profoundly interesting and useful in terms of what people can translate them into in terms of impacting their lives. So anyway, that's my sermonette. Don. So I don't know if you. I mean, what do you guys think? Is this an important topic? Are these really, like the title of the show is things that matter? Are these things that matter?
Not necessarily in a day-to-day how you function basis, but I think they matter to that in the way at the root of all of our culture, all of our action and reaction. I think they're important. Down the line, they will make effect on us as individuals in daily lives, but we got to have the conversations, and there's too few of them in this manner, in my opinion.
For me, this is an enormously consequential question, actually, sort of the governance of the self, because for me, part of my ethical framework is virtue ethics, and one of the most important virtues that one can have is temperaments. Right? Temperance or self-possession that's the key to the rest, right? I mean, if you really are not in possession of yourself, you're not going to be able to cultivate the other virtues. So that's like the fundamental virtue that you have to cultivate. And the thing is, it's not cross-platform. It's not like if you can exercise self-possession and mindfulness and temperance in one domain, that automatically you're good in all the others. I mean, like I'm good in some domains. I can get into a philosophical argument with someone, and I can really sort of typically keep my cool. You put me in a romantic situation where I'm having an argument with someone, and I suck. I'm just terrible at that, right? So this is a skill that you can be better or worse at in different aspects of your life, but the morality, in my view, is about the control of the self. It's about being able to will yourself to do the right thing when it's necessary, and I think you can only do that by conditioning yourself, by creating virtuous habits. I see morality as constituted out of virtues, and you have to cultivate certain habits in yourself. And this is a lifelong enterprise, and we all sort of find ourselves at different stages in this project. But I think that's what it's all about. So, I mean, obviously, your sense of self, your theory of what the self is going to be relevant to whether or not you are able to cultivate certain virtues and how well you can do it. So I think it's actually enormously consequential to me. I think it's actually one of the most fundamental things is sort of having a proper sense of what you are, what your capacities and limits are, and what constitutes self-control. Self-control isn't just restraint. There's much more to that, to self-control, than just restraint. So yeah, for me, that's a really important question.
Yeah, for me, I think any topic that we want to try and have value or meaning with has to be layered on top of who we are in that sense, if you want to use those terms. But we can't have a meaningful discussion about anything without self-awareness and some modicum of being able to self-reflect. I think that's seriously lacking in our world today, is people step back, like you were talking about, step back and take a look at yourself. And, it's just like, that's not done. People don't know how to do that. It's like a lost art of looking at yourself critically and going, I really don't like that about myself. And that's okay. I can do something about it. So if we are just programmed, then where does that come from? But like Kazi was saying, yeah, you're there. Who we are is determined, but we also have that ability to make some decisions, and those are the things that we make us who we are and make us different than everybody else. How we see the world around us is based completely on our own experiences, because it's our interaction with the world. Which is why when you talk with people who have very strong conviction about their religion, it's very hard to argue them or discuss them anything that doesn't fit into that little box. And I think those are the kind of discussions that we're trying to have. Is there's got to be a place to be able to put those boxes aside and say, you know, this is how we are, this is what we are, and then find a way to move on from there.
What do you mean, put the boxes aside?
Well, like religion is a box, science is a box. Well, in that sense, it's something that is. It's something we talk about, something we discuss, but it really isn't who we are. It's outside of ourselves. All this stuff that we have, all the input we get comes from the outside. So it's like we take something from here and something from here and something from here, and this becomes the essence of who we are. So if we can take the box of science and put it over there, the box of religion, put it over there, the box of sports, or whatever box you want to deal with in your life, and say, let's talk about just basic how we are, who we are, and how are we all the same and how are we different. And we can start very different conversations from that perspective than putting it into something that's normally talked about. Does that make any sense?
I think it does, but I also think that something Ozzy was talking about earlier, that he had an incident in his life that he developed sort of an emotional angst around that then came out in terms of behaviors over the year, a very mild one in this particular case, but I think, you know, in my case, it was some fairly major things that, you know, I was just I grew up in a kind of a caustic home, and so I had kind of a put up your dukes sort of mentality for a lot of my life that didn't really serve me well. And so I think that the things that we face emotionally, we have a tendency to be attracted to words and ideas that sort of resonate with those very same things. So if I was brought up in a culture that it was very endeared to a particular religious paradigm, that would all get conflated for me. I would be attached to grandma and grandpa and mom and dad and brother and sister and all of that, and unable to differentiate, I think, the emotional depth with which I attached to that with all of the things that we shared verbally back and forth, like religion, for instance. And so I think that negotiating this thing called self as a you know, standing outside yourself and examining your ideas from an outside perspective and sort of factoring in all that stuff that shapes what it is we embrace or reject is not an easy proposition, and it's certainly not for the you know, the lighthearted. You can't just take a casual approach to it. I think it's work to really dig into and examine this self to be able to put an intentional oar in the water and have any kind of an effect to steer that boat in an intentional direction. So I think religion certainly falls into that category, particularly for people that may have had something that religion either answered, or their whole family and cultural structure and all of that was their belonging to tribe was predicated, not overtly, but you know, by virtue of the way that it was just structured so that they got attached to it. So I think you got to factor those kind of things into seeing why people embrace ideas. At least that's my perspective on it.
And I agree, it's a lot of work. It's hard work because you're going against your own enemy, yourself.
Well, for some of us, the self is our friend.
Well, it's both. It's both. But I mean, we typically embrace our friend. We don't normally embrace our enemy.
No, I just
especially when it's the same person. But yeah, I know what you meant.
Brought up in an environment where we had a nurturing thing, and maybe some things happened, but the family dealt with it constructively and all of that. And so, by virtue of the momentum that was already set into motion, we kind of we were dealt a better hand. And I don't know whether the word "better" is better or is apt there, because I don't know if I would have the kind of strength. You don't go to the gym and lift a pencil. You know, you go to the gym and lift something that challenges you. So I have something that came, you know, I think it's like the alleles for malaria. If you get two of them, you get sickle cell anemia. but if you get one of them, you have protection from malaria. That a lot of things in life are like that. So if you face adversity and overcome it, you're actually stronger than if you maybe coasted, unless you actually subject yourself by discipline to some things that challenge you, which I think that a person that does have a good relationship with themselves might want to consider in order to continue to be better than they were the day before. Yeah, I luckily had a bunch of crap I had to overcome, so. So okay, is this conversation kind of wrapped up? I think everybody kind of shared their perspective and noted. Is there anything that we're missing?
Well, I think there's been a lot of things talked about and a lot of examples and layers put on top of the essence of who we are and how we are. But I think for me the biggest biggest thing to take from a conversation like this has been, like I was saying, is without a true sense or an understanding of what we are and how we interact with the world around us, we get driven by ideologies that tell us we're something that we're not, or something we should be. And without that innate sense of who and what we are, it's very easy to lose track of why we are in a group and why we are a social species and why we need each other so desperately to live life. So I think, to me, those two thoughts have to somehow be tied together. That, yeah, we have this individual, this compilation of experiences, but we are ultimately a species of a social species. We have to figure out how to get that sense of usness as well as that I-ness, or there's really no point. Yeah, it's just what I think.
If I may kind of expand on that, I think part of people who are able to do this, instill in themselves the introspection, the self, in the moment. What's the phrase? It just escaped me. The self-awareness, being in the moment. Phrase and self-awareness. Mindfulness. Thank you. Sorry, brain fart. Those who accept that understand, put so beautifully by Carl Sagan, is just we are an animal on this planet. We have to accept what that all entails, that we individually are only special in our realm of influence, but really nothing special in the grander scheme of things. Going back and knowing our place in the web, as it might be said by a shaman. I think that's what's kind of been lost to a certain degree, and something we really have to relearn to not only answer the self, but to be able to progress as a species and society.
Yeah, I know from my own perspective that I used to be somebody that I didn't necessarily like and appreciate much, and I set my goal on becoming somebody that I would like and admire more, and I've been able to execute that to some degree, although, I do have battles with me sometimes, and I win and lose. But be that as it may, I do think this relationship with the self thing is a valuable thing to work and focus on and use as a springboard for action. So I do think if everybody else wants to just chime in any last thoughts that you would have, and then we'll take it off air and we will open it up to the public. If anybody else wants to join in and maybe have a discussion off air that they weren't comfortable with having on air, we can do that. So maybe we can just put it in the final paces here and drop off the air. Anybody have any thoughts? All right. Well, with that, everybody will send out the off-air link, and thanks for watching. This was Things That Matter, and I really would like to thank everybody who did come in and join in, chime in the process and share the perspective. This was a really good talk from my perspective.
Yeah, it was. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and yeah, I think it was a good discussion, and it's good to talk about stuff that really does mean something. So thanks.
All right, with that, we're out.